All right. How is it going, Bill? Good morning.
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. We're here again. Another weekly rack up. I've got my co-host Yugi back there, so hopefully he'll be a good boy this year. Oh boy. All right. So, what do we have planned for today?
Well, you and I had talked a little bit about maybe showcasing some of the things we've got in
Oh yeah.
Family Pawn. And is Chris in the lobby there waiting for us?
Let's see. I see you here. I don't see Chris yet.
Okay,
If you want to message him, I'll get those images up. It's
that'll be
always
awesome.
been intriguing to me because I know that listening to your podcast, every once in a while you'll mention that there is something that you have in your in your pawn shop there, and it always intrigues me. I'm like, I live in Texas, you're not going to find Mormon memorabilia or rare Mormon books or a cane that, Brigham Young had that was made from the coffin of Joseph Smith in a Texas pawn shop. But I guess Utah's a little bit different in that regard.
Yeah, so Utah, yeah, I mean, you're not going to find Mormon stuff in very many places. But being in southern Utah, we're really close to the fundamentalist community. Centennial Park is a few minutes away. Colorado City, where the Warren Jeffs group is a few minutes away.
Really?
Just lots of regular, I should say regular, but the Brigham Young LDS faction. There's plenty of us around as well, and I say us because I still associate with that particular system. But over the years, my friend and one of the owners of Family Pawn, Chris Bloxam, has been a collector of LDS memorabilia and has always kind of been on the lookout for things, and over the years has kind of grabbed some really cool stuff.
Oh, okay, cool. I know I did a video in the wake of the 2018 race apology episode where I was using the metaphor of a cane of Brigham Young instead of the mantle of the priesthood. And it was something that you told me that you guys had a cane of Brigham Young, and I thought that would be really good to bring an actual cane that was owned by Brigham Young. But it was
Yeah.
it was more expensive than I was willing to invest in it, and then my first inclination was to get a wood chipper, and then just like film feeding it into the wood chipper. But
Yeah, my boss has the cane at his house. It's one of his personal items rather than the store's. I always think there's this cool story where Oliver Cowdery is supposed to, when he had this, the water witching rod, the rod of Aaron, that rod was eventually turned into a cane that Brigham Young owned.
oh
And so,
wow, I had not heard of that.
yeah, there's some stories, there's some accounts out there that speak to that backstory. And so I've always looked at every one of Brigham Young's canes whenever I come across them to try to figure out if this is the one that was the rod of Aaron. And so far, I don't see any that seem to fit that. There's one here at the Brigham Young house here in St. George as well, and there's also one in the Daughters of Utah Pioneers Museum down here. So there's three down here that I know of, and none of those three look like it. And I've seen some in Salt Lake City as well. So
Okay, so Chris is sending some messages saying that he's having some technical issues. Let's see. So a solution that we potentially could have would be to have him call in.
yeah,
Let me.
why don't you text me the number and I'll or text you or just directly message him.
All right, let's see here. Okay, so I gotta figure out a way to. Now I have to see if we can hear him. You'll have to tell me here. I'm gonna have to change the way I'm sharing a screen so I can make sure we
He's got
hear
a
him.
Mac. I don't know if that makes a difference trying to get into the broadcast studio of
It really shouldn't.
yeah, I don't know what the issue is.
Okay. Um, okay, say something, Bill.
Hey.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not going to. Yeah. The problem that I'm going to face is that Chris, are you there?
I'm here, man. What's up?
Hey, okay, so we got to make sure that our technical side is working since you weren't able to connect on your computer. Bill, are you able to hear Chris's voice?
I can.
You can. Oh, okay, excellent. So hopefully that's going out on the stream. Okay, so I'm not sure why that is up. That's weird. Okay. Chris, so you are the owner and proprietor of the family pawn shop, is that correct?
That's right.
So I was sent a folder of images of some interesting relics that you guys have there. And I thought it might be fun to kind of go through those and see if you can speak to them a little bit. And I'll let you and Bill kind of host it. I'll just control the images. You can tell me to go to the next image when it's time.
No problem. Happy to.
Okay, so the image we have up on the screen now is a pair of faces kind of cast in plaster.
Okay, yeah, the death masks. Is that what we're looking at?
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
I have two sets of death masks. The one I have at my home it was taken from Wilford Wood's original masks. The ones in the store there that we're looking at are a copy from a copy from a copy from a copy. If you remember, Joseph Smith and Hiram were killed on June 27, 1844. Their bodies don't make it back to Nauvoo, though, until late the next day. And if I remember correctly, a guy by the name of Philo Dibble knew how to do masks, and so he took a plaster cast of Joseph and Hiram. But the cast would have been taken up to 48 hours after they were murdered. So there would have been some bloating, some swelling. It was summertime, very humid. And if I remember, there were a couple of masks done. They go to Utah, and later they are purchased privately in the late 19th century. And then, of course, Wilford Wood, who was an early Mormon collector, obtained the originals and kept them, and that's where my copy comes from, is his original.
Interesting. Okay, so and what in the note below it says that there's one of them, there's a little bit of irregularity of the chin because in Hiram's case, the gunshot wound actually affected his face, and so there was deformity that they had to rebuild up with the plaster. Is that what we're seeing? I think if that's true, then the one on the left here is Hiram.
That's correct. The one on the left would be Hiram. The part of the chin was gone, and so it was later built back up to make a complete face. And if you also look at the one of Hiram, you can see he was shot to the left side of his nose, which they would have packed with cotton back into the hole, which shows through in the plaster mask.
Oh yeah, so here on the left, the figure on the left, you can see that what would have been that cotton packing right there on the left side of the nose. Somebody in the YouTube comments is asking, why is the chin longer than the face on this figure on the left? That just has to do with the angle. You're seeing the underside of the chin that's contributing to the contour there. I wonder if we have another angle here. Okay, that's just a close-up of the text for that.
It's interesting if you've been to Nauvoo, you see the hole in the door that they say is gunshot through, and it's Joseph, and the shot happens. It's next to his brother, and Hiram essentially falls back and says, Joseph, I'm a dead man. And that shot is what we believe, I think, to that wound on the side of his nose.
Oh, wow. I have here in one of my relics nothing like what you guys have, but I have a little vial of cinnamon whiskey because that was what was used in the temple originally, but it's being stopped up by a little metal ball that's the size of the one that would have gone there. And when I visited Nauvoo, we were given a tour by a historian named Joseph Johnston, and he let each of us take the ball and pass it through the door, so that that little metal ball has been through the hole in the door of the door that had the whole shot that killed them. All right, so let's see the next thing we got. We've got here a set of, it looks like 8 volumes. History of Joseph Smith and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by Dan Vogel, $1,200.
Yeah. Boy, I tell you, the time Dan spent on that, I think it was over a decade.
1,200.
Well,
He's charging more than the church is, and we're accusing the church of priestcraft.
Actually, those are worth probably about $1,500 now. You can only buy them on a secondhand market. But he decided to go back and create a history of the church that he was able to identify all the sources, the textual changes, the textual evolution, track the sources back to their original, the person who originally was the quote was from. He identified the scribes, the handwriting, how they came together.
So we all are familiar with the history of the church that you can go to Deseret Book and buy, and it's, it was originally compiled by church historians and church scribes. And what you're saying is that Dan went through the source documents that went into that and was able to identify all of the details behind it. And this is really interesting because if you talk to the people who insist that Joseph Smith fought against polygamy and that he wasn't involved in polygamy at all, one of the things that they'll do is they'll point to certain aspects of the history of the church where it depicts Joseph Smith as being definitely involved in polygamy and teaching it behind the scenes, but then they'll go back to the original documents and say, look, the later historians, the later people who were under Brigham's control changed the source documents so that when you read the history of the church, it looks like Joseph was involved in polygamy. And I wonder if Dan's detailed, search into this document elucidates that any, because anytime you talk to somebody who insists that Joseph Smith did not fight polygamy, that's a big part of their argument was these changes.
Yeah, you're right. The original history of the church was put together by B.H. Roberts, I believe, in 1930. Mm-hmm. Commemorate the founding of the church. But there was some, I guess what sometimes historians call filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
That later turned out not to be accurate.
Yeah, and anytime I try to convince people, why, even though those changes are real, why it still doesn't convince me that Joseph was innocent of polygamy, one of the things is that it was made very clear by Joseph that his journals and all of, him having a scribe following him around and writing everything that he did, that was not a private journal. That was a public performance piece. And he said at one point, all of these people that are accusing me of doing these bad things, the way he was going to refute that was he just said, I've had somebody writing down everything that I've did, and if I need to bring that out to prove that I didn't do it, then I can. But that just tells you that he's premeditatedly creating a system of plausible deniability that is his journal, that he intends people to read to prove that he didn't do things. But if he's writing things in his journal which are specifically intended to hide his activities and be a proof for it, then you can't trust it. So you've got that whole question of the unreliable narrator in Joseph's history. All right, let's keep going. I hope that Dan's seeing a good cut of each of these things sold at $1,200, because heaven knows he puts a lot of work into this stuff. This is published by the Smith Pettit Foundation. Is that like some sort of independent Mormon publisher? Because I'm used to seeing his stuff come out under Signature.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know why Signature didn't do this. I don't know. It's a good question for him.
All right, let's keep going. Let's see here. Boop. Okay, replica photo of Emma Smith's original LDS handbook in a frame that is quite ornate and large. This is now the the page here is the
Go ahead.
same one as there's a display at the Church History Library that has Emma's hymn book. I assume this is a
Yeah, we don't have a copy of her actual hymn book. Those are extremely expensive. I was at an auction once where I saw one go for, oh man, 310, I think it was, 310,000.
wow.
Very small. You would hardly know what it was if you came across it in a thrift store. It's very small, like almost the size of maybe 2 credit cards,
Okay.
credit card and a half. So that's just a copy of an original page, just in a frame.
All right, let's keep going. Okay, Mormon Chronicle by John D. Lee. It's a set of 2 books. Now,
Yeah.
this was the kind of the pseudo expose sort of biography that John D. Lee gave after he was, I guess, took the fall for the Mountain Meadows massacre.
Well, yeah. The Mountain Meadows. The very first Mormon book I ever read on Mormon history was The Mountain Meadow Massacre by Juanita Brooks when I was 15 years old. And it just blew my mind that the story is so colorful and so incredible. That's where I got my first taste of Mormon history and wanted more.
I see.
John D. Lee's journals, though, are really fascinating. It's anyone that would read them would go, "Wow, they're salacious." He uses the word frigging in his journals to talk about his sexual proclivities with his plural wives, and
I would say that
read
he was the first
years.
person to come up with Mormon cuss words, but I'm pretty sure that was a common euphemism back in the day.
I think it probably was, but
I could see Napoleon Dynamite going, "Oh man, that's freaking awesome."
in his case, it's more like I don't remember her name, but my 16-year-old wife, 17-year-old wife, whatever, I frigged her 15 times in the last day. That type of context. If I recall, the journals, though, are completed by his attorney and sold in lieu of payment for defending him at his trial, the second trial where he lost.
That's
fascinating books.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, if you read the church gospel topic essay on the violence in early church history, they do acknowledge that blood atonement was taught. They frame it as kind of fiery metaphor, but then they acknowledge that in at least one instant it may have been acted on. And John D. Lee's account is one of the places where we find the most explicit detail of people actually being blood atoned under the doctrine of blood atonement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the fascinating parts of his biography. All right, so let's keep. I'm unfortunately, because you had to call in, and if I'm going to be able to share the screen and hear you, anytime Bill talks, there's going to be a horrendous echo, and it's going to keep going. So we silenced you, Bill. I'm sorry. So let's keep going. Let's see, but we'll get through some of this stuff here. All right, St. George Temple pin, 25 buckaroos. Was this like from the opening of the St. George Temple?
Yeah, it was to commemorate the 100-year. I don't have the images in front of me, but I'm going off of memory. There's a pin.
Sure.
I think it says 1977 on it.
Yep. Oh, okay, yeah. So it was opened in 1877, and then this would have been something they gave in 1977. Now, I'm a mission field Mormon, and so I grew up outside of Utah. A lot of this stuff, like, are there people really interested in kitsch like this? Is that a Mormon collector thing?
One of the things I've learned over the years is that Mormons aren't interested in Mormonism. I don't know why.
Really?
People aren't more. Haven't you noticed that? Like, you'll be in church and you'll tell us some really cool historic story, and Mormons either just shrug their shoulders or go, that's interesting. Did you read that in the Ensign or not? No. It's in this book by John D. Lee. That's not doctrine.
Yeah.
And they move on.
Okay, Salt Lake Temple Dedication Service ticket, April 22nd, 1893, signed by Wilford Woodruff.
Yeah, so the temple dedication, it lasted for weeks because Wilford Woodruff wanted all the members that could attended. I believe over 80,000 members attended the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple. So that's not the most expensive ticket. The one you want is the April 6th, 1893 ticket. That was more valuable than this one.
Oh, is that the first day?
And the real money ticket is a tower ticket. I've never owned one, but I've seen one. So they issued to VIPs a ticket to go up into the tower of the temple. The regular members, Mormons, didn't even know about this, but dignitaries, VIP Mormons were issued a special ticket called a tower ticket.
Which part is the tower? Is that like one of the pillars on the sides?
Yeah,
the
under the
tallest
Angel
pillar?
Moroni.
Oh, so you can actually walk up there. Can you walk around the parapet or whatever it is that's around the spire?
I don't know. I don't know.
Huh.
But the ticket says, Salt Lake City Temple dedication ticket. I believe it says tower ticket or admit one tower ticket, something like that.
All right.
It's been
Well,
years since I did.
if you own a virtual reality setup like the HTC Vive or something like that, there's this really cool thing you can do where you put the headset on and then you go into Google Earth, and Google Earth has actually created 3D models of a lot of the stuff, integrated it with the maps, and you can fly and stand on top of the Salt Lake Temple and see the different towers from that perspective. So we'll have to do that one morning and do a guided tour. Okay, let's keep going here. All right. Original adobe wall from around Temple Square. This is like the wall that's encasing the whole courtyard and everything?
Yeah, so they get there and build a wall around Temple Square, and that's one of the original adobe bricks.
Mm.
Back 1850, I believe.
Next we have 10 volumes of Wilford Woodruff's journal.
Oh, yeah. Boy, man, that's one of my favorite things I own. I believe they're now online. I believe
They are.
has them online.
Yeah, they are. But they're not. The typescript isn't necessarily online. It's the scanned. You can go to the Church History Library and find the scanned journals themselves, which are intensely fascinating because Wilford Woodruff drew all sorts of symbols and annotations in his journal as well.
Mm-hmm. That set of journals has historically cost, between $3,000 and $4,000 to have a set. And, as they would come available on the secondhand market, they would sell quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know. They probably dropped in value quite a bit now that they're on.
Now that they're online, yeah, I know. When I first started investigating things in around 2014, 2013, this was one of the things that was really hard for me to find. There was a document put out that was just excerpts, like leaves from my journal, where somebody put little excerpts of it. But it was great to be able to see the original thing. And I couldn't afford that.
I'd be happy to sell you those, Jonathan.
Yeah.
You want those? I'm happy
No,
to sell you
if
those.
I'm going to spend almost $4,000 on something, I'm getting the cane.
Okay.
All right. American Holy Bible by J. Howe, 1838. Is this something like near what the Bible that would have been used for the translation?
Not really. Bibles in the 19th century are very inexpensive, except for the Finney Bible, which is the one that Joseph used when he did the translation of the Bible.
Mm.
And I've had one before. I don't have one now. I would guess they run about, I don't know, $3,000 or $4,000 now for a Finney Bible.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mm-hmm. You
All
see them
right.
online once in a while.
So now this is one of the items that was hinted at in Bill's recent podcast, and that was a unique seer stone. It's like an oval-shaped stone with two holes, one on either end. It seems to be flat and sort of like a squished saucer shape. And this is a Mark Hofmann seer stone.
Yeah, that seer stone. So it's a Hofmann forgery seer stone, and what it really is an Indian amulet. It's probably about 300 years old or so. So he obtains the amulet, forges the paper that's with it, and then sells it off. We've lost the chain of people that owned it. I know it started with Lynn Jacobs, But the store he bought it from in Logan, the owner, who was still alive at the time, couldn't remember Lynn Jacobs being involved in it. But he's still around. He could probably tell us more about it.
So there's a handwritten note under it that says stone through which Luther would see the complexion and gender of all of his children. Is that handwriting, Mark Hofmann's handwriting?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Stone through which father.
Oh, okay. Father. Okay. Father.
So apparently you've got, at least in Hoffman's mind, some farmer in Logan that when his wife or wives would become pregnant, he'd pull his seer stone out, line it up there in the, I don't know, wherever, take a look through it and decide whether or not those children, what their complexion was going to be and what their gender was going to be.
Wow. It's like early frontier ultrasound.
Sure. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay. Well, as interesting as it is that Hofmann was creating fakes of authentic things, now Hofmann forgeries themselves are sought after items just because of the history involved in that whole affair.
Yeah, I collect a lot of Hofmann. I've got his driver's license and
really
tax return, insurance. Yeah. For a while, I was very fascinated with.
All right, this is a meteorite. Fascinating. I don't know if there's any Mormon history connection with this meteorite. Let's go to the next one.
Meteorites aren't that rare.
Let's see. Some sort of document signed by Erastus Snow.
Oh yeah, that's a handwritten land deed in St. George. I don't have the image in front of me, but I think it's in the 70s, 1870s, buys a piece of land. But he, if you're familiar with St. George, he had a home called the Big House, and it was right on the corner of St. George Boulevard and Main Street, where Zion's Bank sits today. Very big house.
Okay.
One of the first two guys in the Salt Lake Valley, Orson Pratt and Erastus Snow, were the first two guys to ride into and see the Salt Lake Valley.
Okay.
Snow Canyon's named after him down here where we live.
Times and Seasons, page 2500. This is an actual page from the original Times and Seasons published in Nauvoo?
Yeah, and a beautiful copy. That copy it doesn't feel like it's ever been read. And what's valuable about that copy, I think it's dated May 15th, 1844. It's Joseph Smith's first published platform of his run for the presidency of the United States.
Oh, really? Okay. Because I know there was a dedicated pamphlet later released that was specifically about the presidency and his policies, and that's where people will frequently point to him. They'll say he was an abolitionist because his recommendation was that the slaves be freed, and then the government purchase lands or something, or sell lands and use the proceeds to compensate slave owners. And but that was a separate pamphlet that would have come out after his first announcement in the Times and Seasons.
Yeah, we're getting really close to his death. That's May 15th, 1844, June 27th, 1844. This time of his death. This is just a very beautiful copy of the Times. And, Times and Seasons, the history behind that even, Ebenezer Robinson had kind of a, had a little business going that he didn't quite want to sell.
Yes, and then God came in with a convenient revelation telling the 12 to buy it from him. That's some great history. God seems to be really concerned about these corporate interests. All right,
these small business transactions for people.
I know, exactly. Okay, we got some... Oh, this is an original biographical sketches of Joseph Smith, the prophet, and his progenitors for many generations, published by Orson Pratt in 1853.
Oh, yeah, man. That is one of the coolest books for a Mormon history collector to own, in my mind. There were two printed. Orson Pratt does it in England. Brigham Young's pissed about it. First of all, he didn't give permission to have this done. Second of all, it speaks very favorably of the Smith family, which Brigham Young wasn't that into, and asked the saints to get rid of the books, destroy them. There is an excerpt that I found that the church said that you could turn it in for a tithing credit. I think it was 10
really
cents. Get yourself a tithing credit if you turn the book in. Now, what's really funny is there were two done. One, a very nice collectible copy with gold tooling that the leaders all had, and then the standard copy, which is that one, wasn't very dressed up and nice. Well, when Brigham told everyone to get rid of the books, the common people did. The leaders said, nah, I'm not doing that. So there's far more of the nice copies out there than the standard copy.
Huh.
I think it's funny. The members of the church, absolutely, let's follow the prophet and destroy our books.
And the leaders.
The leaders, well, I'm not getting rid of my book, but
I just think it's
Get rid of
funny.
yours.
It's sad that back then Brigham Young was, it did not meet his religious political desires for this book to be out there. So he just says the word, and members everywhere are ripping it up and destroying it. And then I think they republished like a cleaned up version with all the parts that Brigham didn't like taken out later. But now we've got this,
like 1907 or something.
Yeah. So now we've got this church manual that has these old racist ideas that the church wants to disavow. And rather than doing at least that thing where they say, okay, all members everywhere, if you receive the manual, shred it, burn it, get rid of it, and we're going to issue a new one that's been corrected. They don't even do that.
I know. One of the coolest things about that book, though, is that's the first time we hear the story of Joseph Smith's leg operation.
Oh, really? The one that I grew up with in primary about him, refusing strong drink?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you would not have heard about that during Joseph Smith's lifetime. But after he dies, and his mom writes this book in 1853, that's when we hear about the leg operation. First time.
Wow,
And
so you would have
I
seen
know
it.
an echo, but
That's okay,
just
go
know that the real reason Joseph refused alcohol was because his father was an alcoholic. His father was a severe alcoholic to the point where Alvin had to help build the house. And so once you recognize the real reasons behind why he didn't, that plays a huge role.
Yeah. All right, Bill, if I mute him when you start talking, I think the echo goes away. So you just let me know. If you chime in, I'll mute him, and I think that'll stop the echo. All right, let's keep going because we got some to get through, and then we want to get to some calls. Okay, this is a fun piece. These are Book of Abraham facsimiles in color, published on real papyrus.
Yeah, they're just copies. A lot of members, when they go to Egypt to tour it, there's stores where you can that sell those, or you can bring those back on actual papyrus. They're pretty common. There's a lot of those out there.
You can bring stuff there.
Yeah.
So the pictures you're looking at right now are just really small copies that I made, that I printed. If there's actually another one that shows the three on the ground, hopefully you've got that one, Jonathan. There should be a different image, and those are the actual, right there. So these are the actual sets of the Book of Abraham papyri that we have at our store. They're replicas. They were made in Egypt by an Egyptian artist. It was a Mormon who went over there and asked them to be made, and came back the next day, and the guy had painted several copies of these. Each one of these is different. We do sell these at the store. If somebody wants a copy, I'm happy to mail them too. I think we're selling them for $70 a set. There's all three of them come in the set. I've got them hanging on the wall. You've got the depiction of men's penis there in that one. If you look where there he is, there is Elohim upon his throne, which actually is the erect penis of men and him sitting on a chair.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things that I had made dealing with the facsimile is this pillow, because you can see that we've got the same circular diagram. You've got the God figure in the middle. You've got Min with the what I call Min's member there. You've got all these same motifs. And so you could be like, oh, look, it's facsimile 2. No, this is a hypocephalus from a different tomb. You have to turn it over. This is facsimile 2. You can always tell the difference because the head, which was kind of pasted on after the fact, is off-center from the body of the figure in the middle. And then part of the figures around the side are totally off. So this is my hypocephalus pillow. You can't tell which side is Joseph Smith's, the figure of Elohim, God, Mormon, and which side is common funerary skull. It's just complete chance that they're almost exactly the same.
And that changes the meaning of every member a missionary.
No. It wasn't too different back in the day anyway. All right, so okay, all right, you're back, Chris. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay, so here we've got now a picture of the seer stone, the small goose egg stone, and then a whole bunch of banded jasper.
Yeah, this story, Jonathan, I'm reluctant to even discuss with you. If I tell you this story, you're going to come back to church. So you'd have to prepare yourself. Are you ready?
The question would just be whether or not the church is ready to have somebody back in there who's going to talk and ask questions. Okay, lay it on me.
Well, they didn't like me very much, but yeah. So banded iron jasper was formed when the oceans were made up of acid, so 2 or 3 billion years ago. And as the oceans cooled, blue-green algae formed and settled on the bottom, were oxidized in iron. And so the oceans start to recede. So you get these bands of iron banded jasper in several countries in the world. In the U.S., it's only found in a very narrow band from Wyoming to Minnesota, very narrow. So how did this piece of iron banded jasper, this chocolate colored seer stone, end up in upstate New York?
Upstate?
Right?
Yep. Very good question.
The miracle begins. Yes, the miracle starts.
Not only that, but I think geologists will say, well, an oval-shaped rock that's somewhat smoothed has probably been on a riverbed somewhere for a long period of time.
You would think, yeah. And as far as I know, this is the only cabochon-shaped iron banded jasper stone ever. I've never seen another one like this. I don't think anyone has. So it makes it even more rare. So the theory is that this is a gastrolift, so that a dinosaur ate this piece of jasper in, Wyoming or wherever, walked to upstate New York, dies. Through glacial advance and glacial retreat, the stone is forced 22 feet under the ground until the early 1800s, when Joseph Smith has been hired to find or dig the well for Willard Chase. The stone's found. Joseph says, "Hey, throw that up to me. Let me see that. Do you mind if I borrow this?" Willard Chase says, "No, it's my stone. You can borrow it, but you can't have it." And that's the stone that Joseph Smith uses to translate the Book of Mormon.
Wow. It's fascinating that the stone just happens to be like a geological unicorn. And even though I don't know, I don't look at a lot of stones. So I see it and I'm like, oh, it's a neat stone, but I wouldn't recognize it as being so remarkably unique that there has to be some story of it having been transported in the gizzard of some dinosaur.
Yeah.
Well, the story goes on. Stones today are collected. They're not extremely valuable, but people buy those stones. They're called Genesis stones because people feel like they can receive inspiration from another realm. I feel like.
Well, that's actually really fascinating. Did that mythology about this type of stone exist in 1820s, 1830s? Or is that a more modern thing?
And I haven't been able to find the answer to that.
Because if it did, we know that there were magical notions about physical objects back in the day. That's why we have this whole folk magic thing. And if that existed then it's another one of those convenient things, just like the date that you get the plates is September 21st or whatever, which is a known magical date. It just fits perfectly in that. Were you going to say something, Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to say 2 things. One is that the fact that it's in Palmyra, it doesn't belong there. The fact that it's rounded and smooth, as Chris is pointing to, that shouldn't have happened. We have a dinosaur that supposedly carried it a long distance and during that time polished it and rounded it off. It also should be noted there's that story about Martin Harris where Martin Harris switches out the stones and Joseph is trying to translate and he goes, "Oh, Martin, everything is as dark as Egypt." Well, when you realize the rarity of the stone and the unlikelihood that any other rock would have looked anything like it, it is no wonder that Joseph, putting his head into the hat, would have recognized that that's not his stone and figured out he was being played and hence turned it around on Martin Harris.
Very good point. All right, let's keep going. Let's see here. Boop. That's just more of that. Okay, so this is some of that Mark Hofmann stuff you were talking about, Chris, where we've got a check made out with Mark Hofmann's signature to Jeff Salt, to Mark Heim. You didn't happen to get a check to Mark Hofmann from Gordon B. Hinckley for like a buttload of money?
For the 70 grand or whatever
Yeah.
from FIB.
Yes.
No, Hoffman checks are there's a lot of them out there. They used to be about $75 a piece, and they started being circulated because Dora Lee, Hoffman's ex-wife, when she needed some money, she would take one or two of the canceled checks and go sell them to a collector. And so I think there's probably hundreds out there at this point, but they're probably worth $125 now a piece, $150 maybe.
That's really fascinating. All right.
Fun stuff to collect.
We've got that image there. Okay, we've got some repeat images. We're just going to skip through. We've got a photo of St. George Temple. I think that's the end of the images that we have from the shop this morning, Chris.
No problem. Anytime you want to talk about this stuff, I love it.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of what you have there. And Bill reminds people that if anyone wants to go see these in person, they can just stop down at Family Pond and ask whatever questions they'd like to about the history of some of these documents. All right.
Jonathan, I need to know.
Yeah.
Am I responsible for your return to the church with the Iron Banded Jasper story?
No.
Okay.
If it happens, though,
All right,
I'll definitely credit you.
Please let me know.
Okay. All right. Take care, man.
See you. Bye.
Bye. All right. You're unmuted there. Let me.
I just want to say, there's still an echo.
Yeah.
I met Chris 5 years ago, and up until that point, I lived in Ohio, and I'm this Mormon who just is deeply in love with Mormon history, and I'd never met another Mormon who was excited about and knew as much about Mormon history as Chris. And when I met him, it was like, wow, here's this other guy who reads all of this stuff and is diving into it every day and thinking about it. It's been a lot of fun over the last 5 years, having kind of being in the same space and being friends with somebody who knows these things in and out as well as you do.
All right. I'm having some technical issues. Let me get out and reboot this. I'll be right back. All right, I had to reboot and get back in. I had some technical times. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. So that was a fun little diversion. Now,
that was cool.
Before we get to, let's see, do we want to do calls or we want to talk about Romney?
It might be interesting to take a few phone calls. Maybe somebody's got some questions on these things that we could address.
I'm going to go ahead and put up the call number. If you have got a question or an observation that you would like to share with us or the audience, then please call in. The number is 210-422-2222. In the meantime, what did you make of the big news event in Mormon history this week, which was that our very own Senator Mitt Romney... Oh, we got a call. Hold on. Let's see what we can do here. I'm a little bit concerned here. All right. You are on Talk on Things and Stuff. Can you hear me?
Hey there.
Hey, how's it going?
All right, so this is a time delay, I guess, because I'm watching the show, what I thought was live.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay just with the streaming thing. If you want to mute your computer and
sure.
just interact with us.
iPad, yeah. Can I say a wordy dirge if it comes up, or should I watch?
No, that's fine. Whatever, everything goes. Just be nice.
I'm not planning to, but yeah. Hey, well, gentlemen, I can't just think of me as rank and file Randy, if you would. I'm rank and file Randy. I was a convert at age 20. I did all the stuff, for like 38 years, and I've been a year out. I've been 1 year out, and you two are two of my favorite fellows in community, and so it's how can I not call in and say hello and share a couple thoughts with you real quick?
Well, thank you very much. What's on your mind?
I like your work a lot, and Bill, I like your work a lot as well. We're looking at the Seer stone and everything, and I remember as a TBM, it came out I think in 2015 in the Ensign, and they showed more Seer stones as well. And of course, the church wants to put lipstick on a pig. You know what I mean? Just kind of smooth over, make it sound good. And I remember glancing at it, but I guess it kind of got stuck on my shelf. And then we had a Sunday school teacher in gospel doctrine a little over a year ago. He's progressive, very good. And we're going over it, and then he's passing out handouts. So there's a picture of the stone, the little egg-shaped caramel one, and chocolatey one. And it just hits me. It's like, nobody. Really? Nobody? Am I the only one sitting here going, Jesus Christ? No. Because I feel when you go through the process of leaving the church, the anger stages of grief, and the big one's anger. I was kind of going right there, and
you went straight to anger.
I realized,
past denial, past blame, just anger.
Yeah, but I went. I mean, I joined at age 20, but there was the right thing to do. I actually went on a mission. I mean, I joined and went on a mission, and I didn't know any better, but the church, because of what they taught, if you remember, years back, this is the mid 80s, I went to the a mission in California, English speaking, mid 80s, and the teaching materials they had, pretty much the stuff, and I taught that he translated the Urim and Thummim, et cetera, et cetera. There was no Seer stone, nothing. And so then they're changing the narrative. They're gaslighting us.
So you taught with the breastplate and the spectacle. He would look down, and there was little spectacle things, and he'd be looking at the gold plates.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and all because of Lumen and Walters was trying to one-up him or whatever. I don't know. Now he's stuck with the symbols. But but I remember I'm sitting there. Am I the only one? My God! And it's like one of the moments, and my shelf was cracking pretty hard and stuff like that. Anyway, I found my way out. But what is ironic to me, I'm loving the show because you guys are showing all these relics and stuff. And I made a comment. I've seen the Jupiter Talisman that Joseph Smith supposedly had on him, when he died. Or the
Really?
replica of.
Okay.
They sell it on eBay, right? A
Yeah.
replica of the Jupiter Talisman, right? And so it's like, but I didn't realize all the stuff. But the big irony is this: I came in the game as age 20. I love church history, which is the Whitewashed church history, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I read all kind of stuff. I read more than a lot of my, missionary companions or whatnot, or people I knew. I was really into it, and there is plenty to study of Whitewashed. So all the histories from Joseph Smith's time, what the apostle said, what the prophet said, et cetera, right?
Oh yeah.
And so there's so much to study, but it's not the real church history. And I think a lot of people who in the church who make an effort to, hey, I'm going to study church history, they're going to study the sugar down version and not the true church history. So but I guess the times are changing on that. What do you think about that? The old whitewashed church history.
I went through the same phase. I mean, I felt like I had studied church history. I read this biography of Joseph Smith that was, sold in the church bookstore years before I made my way out of the church, but it didn't even talk about polygamy. And, and anytime there was anything that Joseph Smith was persecuted for, he was the innocent victim. It was always persecuted innocence, which is a form of melodrama that is pure propaganda. That once you unplug yourself from this mindset that he is this innocent person, and you say, well, wait a second, if you listen to the other side, what are they saying? And then is there any truth or validity to it? And is it justified? And when you look at that perspective, then suddenly it's a very different picture. You're like, well, I understand now why they had a problem with the Mormons who moved into the area with this guy telling them that God told them that all the property of the people that are there, were theirs by divine right, and just on and on and on. So the whitewashed picture that the church posed was not just in Sunday school in the manuals, it was also in all the literature that was promoted and declared to be safe by the church. Did you have that same experience, Bill? I mean, you were already reading D. Michael Quinn when you were a teenager or a young man. I had never even heard of him, so...
I read, of course, I read all of Mormon doctrine. I read.
Hello, I'm sorry. Are you talking to me? You said Bill.
Yeah, Bill. I was talking to Bill.
Yeah, I read Mormon Doctrine. I read Joseph
I'm not here, Bill.
Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. I read the Essentials in Churches. My trouble, Jonathan, was that I took these prophets, seers, and revelators at their word. I believed in them when they said the earth was 6,000 years old, when they said that Cain was Bigfoot, when they said all the things they've said over the last 200 years. I believed it. And when I come to realize, like, oh, these guys constantly contradict themselves, they constantly backtrack, they constantly move in the exact same direction that they point to the world moving and then call the world a lost and fallen world, and it just all fell apart.
Yeah. All right, caller, I'm sorry. I realized in the middle of all this that you probably can't hear Bill. That's one side of this technical process that I haven't figured out yet, but I'm working on it. I'm going to figure it out eventually. So you'll have to see the stream to see what he said. Thank you very much for your call. I'm going to hang up and open up the lines again, but I appreciate your kind words and your suggestion here.
Okay. Hey, thanks. You guys
All right,
care.
take care. So the Jupiter Talisman itself, last time I was in Utah, I was part of a group. I can't remember if you were there, Bill. I think you might have been, that got to go and tour the Wood Museum. And one of the things that I was slobbering over was the potential of seeing the Jupiter Talisman itself, because it is in the collection of the Wood Museum. And if people don't know, this is just like a private museum housed in a private property. You have to schedule with a group large enough to go, and they are very much a faithful family. And so there's a whole story that's tied into their family about every item that's there. But they don't let you actually see the talisman. They show you a picture of the matriarch of the family holding the talisman, which is like a coin-shaped thing with some magical inscriptions on it. But that's as close as we got. It was a big letdown.
So it's there, but you don't get to see it. So everybody goes to see it, but they don't really want you to see it.
Well, the thing is, apparently there's like different family members, and only some of them have the key to the specific vault that has it. So depending on which family member gives you the tour, but they've all figured out that they can dangle the prospect of seeing it until the end, and then let you down at the end. Oh, I guess we can't see it.
So you know where you rank in this family by whether you have the skeleton key or not.
That was the unspoken thing there. Now I see that you've got a screen shared here. Yeah, this is exactly
the story.
Yeah.
There's the Mormonism I grew up with, and I bought into it. I thought this is what Joseph Smith did. I figured Nephi and Moroni and Alma and Abinadi and all those guys worked really hard at getting their message out, and I just assumed that it had to be utilized. But the reality is it's a rock and a hat, and the plates are not even in the room.
And even more remarkable to this, I don't know if you've heard the story from Scientology. If you watch Going Clear, then you'll see this part where L. Ron Hubbard is describing the future and the past, the whole Xenu civilization that happened. And one of the things he says is that back then, people traveled, and these individuals were transported transgalactically or interplanetarily in ships that looked
transgalactically
that looked very much like the Boeing 757s, and then he mentions the airplane that is current and modern and new in their era, when L. Ron Hubbard is doing this. And then he talks about how the cars and the style of dress were very similar to what existed in that era at that time.
It was kind of like a Quaker wardrobe, but they were just a little bit taller, right?
Yeah, but if you go back to the time frame where this is happening, spectacles themselves were a new form of technology. And so Joseph Smith's taking this new thing that is on everybody's mind, because if you think about it, vision correction being readily available, being easy to use like this, then saying, oh, well, this is the paradigm by which we do it. It just follows that model with charlatans tapping into things that are on people's mind that people are predisposed to accept and incorporating it into their narrative. And I just, when I see this picture, that comes to mind immediately. Yeah, and there's another rendition.
I just put a picture up of the Nephite spectacles. And when I look at those, I don't have to stretch too far to think that's a creation of the 1830s.
Yeah, very true. All right. Well, the phones are open again. If somebody would like to call, the number is 210-422-2222. Share with us what's on your mind, and we'll try to get around the technical aspects of all of this. In the meantime, we have, as Mormons, the unique position of having a white horse in the Senate, who Mitt Romney this week was the first senator to cast a vote that would potentially, or was against a president in his own party on articles of impeachment. Did you get a chance to see Romney's speech preceding that vote, Bill?
I didn't see it. I was made aware of kind of the context of what was going on. I really don't pay much attention to politics anymore. As I deconstructed Mormonism, politics became less interesting, and I just kind of stepped away from all of that and tried to enjoy my life. But I think it is noteworthy that he is essentially standing up against his own party, although I think Mitt, to some degree, is liberal in a lot of his leanings. But in some, obviously officially declares himself a Republican and stood up against his own party. And I think that does say something. I think it does is certainly noteworthy.
Yeah. I listened to the speech that he gave prior to his vote, as well as an interview that he gave on Fox. And he informs his constituents and the nation about his motivation for his vote. And one of the things that he brings out immediately, and if you watch his speech in the Senate House itself, he does very good emoting. It's almost Elder Eyring level emoting. He talks about that he's a very deeply religious man, and he takes his covenant before God, or his oath before God, very, very seriously. And he's saying this in the context of his role as a senator, and the fact that each of them have sworn into their office, and part of that oath, in his mind, is an oath to God to uphold the Constitution. And so he frames his vote as one that's being rooted in his deep religious moral principles, and tied to the Constitution. And that's really not surprising. I think Mormons, it's a very, very American religion, in that our very early prophets, Joseph Smith himself, declared that the Constitution was a divinely inspired document, and it's very much rooted in our nation's government structure. So it's not surprising that he would do that.
Yeah, and when you take into account, the white horse prophecy, when you talk about the constitutional hang by a thread, there are a lot of Latter-day Saints, and we get a lot of these end of days prepper type Latter-day Saints who come into our pawn shop. They want to buy silver and build up some type of reserve. They want to come in and buy multiple AR style semi-automatic assault rifles because they want to be ready for the last days. And there are a lot of Mormons out there who deeply believe that anytime there is a Mormon politician close to the White House, that could be the guy. That could be the guy who helps us as a collective system of religious followers save the world, essentially.
Yeah. And if you're not a Mormon or in the Mormon tradition and you're wondering, what is he talking about, white horse prophecy? That is part of the unique and fun Mormon history, where shortly after Joseph Smith traveled to D.C. to try to have an interview with the president to petition to have the grievances of the Mormons who had been ousted from community after community and had material loss, trying to petition to get the government to remedy that, and they essentially turned him away. There's this rumor that he gave a prophecy that the Mormons themselves are now the last people who will support and defend the Constitution, and they're the only true Americans, and that at some point in the future the Constitution will hang by a thread, and it's the elders of the church or somebody from the church who will come in and save the Constitution as a man riding on a white horse. And that symbolism of somebody coming in on a white horse as a savior is one that has plenty of mythological and ancient allusions. It's part of kind of this biblical imagery. But that is, when you hear Mormons talk about the white horse prophecy, it's kind of like the one mighty and strong. It's this thing where you're always looking to the future, and anytime anything happens, you're like, oh wait, could this be the prophecy? Because you have this notion that Joseph was a prophet, so the things that he said are going to come to pass are going to come to pass.
Yeah, Mormonism believes that Mormonism is the reason Stephen Douglas, for instance, lost the election with Abe Lincoln, right?
Yeah. There's a really neat excerpt that I'm going to put together and share on the YouTube channel. Elder Holland just a few weeks ago was speaking in South America, and part of his comments, he goes over technology after technology, television, the internet, airplanes, and in every single one of those technologies, he says that these things were created for us, for the church, and we just let the world use it. But every one of these technological advances was to fulfill the purposes of God in the work that we're doing as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's just so interesting to see how this group reframes anything that it can into the context of itself. And that's one of those things that you'll see in other controlling groups, is this reframing concept. But
you did a beautiful job of this in a Thinker of Thoughts or Thoughts on Things and Stuff video on YouTube, where you talk about any time there was a monsoon or a typhoon or a tornado or a forest fire, that the church runs in and starts taking credit for its God being in control of this and making these things happen as a warning to the world to repent and come into Mormonism, right?
Yeah, and you can see other examples of other religions do exactly the same thing. That's a video. If you Google mystical manipulation, you'll see it's a concept that is so common in groups that claim divine power as part of controlling the members that there's a name that researchers use it. So they'll be like, oh, that's mystical manipulation. So one of the things I wanted to reflect on as we contemplate Mitt Romney's historic vote is that because he framed it so deeply in religious language and an oath to God, you have to understand that there are two sides to that coin. You know, people who are ideologically opposed to Trump will see that and they'll maybe have a little bit of burning in their bosom and they'll be like, that's really great. You just have to realize that anytime a politician informs their vote and their decision based on a religious justification, then you just have to realize that then gives power to the religion and the men who claim control over that religion to direct that particular politician's vote if they root their decisions in the religion itself. And this was something, Romney is a name known to the nation because he, at one point a few elections ago, was the front runner of the Republican Party. He was the standard bearer of the Republican Party. And so this was in the election that he lost to Obama. In his presidential campaign, the nation was concerned about having a Mormon president, much in the way that when John F. Kennedy ran, the nation was concerned about having a Catholic president, because here you have somebody who's deeply religious in a religious hierarchy that owes an allegiance to a man at the head of a church. Not all religions have this pyramid top-down person in charge at the front organization. But the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church certainly do. And so in order to answer the public's concern on this, back in, I think it was 2012, the church, including two apostles, released a video to try to rest the nation's mind on this question of whether or not the church will have an undue influence on any politician who may run for office. And you can see in that video that Elder Cook and Elder Ballard are just like, we just don't understand why people think that, there's no evidence that the church tries to, direct the politicians. There's just no evidence of it. Well, then fast forward a few years after 2012, and one of the first leaks that happened to what was then Mormon leaks was a series of closed door, behind the scenes videos of a conversation between a Mormon senator who happened to also be a temple recommend carrying high priest, having a meeting with the First Presidency, with the Quorum of the 12, kind of reporting to them his actions. He was just coming out of his office, having not won re-election, and so he was then there with the liaison, who is kind of the person who has an office in D.C., who receives communication from the brethren and then interacts with the senators and congressmen who are temple recommend carrying members of the church. Now, if you juxtapose some of the things that were said in that meeting with some of the things that the church released in its fluffy PR piece trying to tell the public that there's no problem, the church does not direct politicians, then you learn some things that are difficult to see. And I created a video back in the time, and because of Mitt grounding his decision in his religion and his oath before God, I thought it was worth going through and maybe commenting on. So I'm going to set this up for us, Bill. Okay. So we'll play this and we're going to see some of this. So in October of 2016, an anonymous former church employee leaked video from a 2009 closed-door meeting. Now, you got to look at this timing. Okay, so this meeting that we're about to see is 2009. It's just coming to public awareness in 2016. You're going to see Senator Gordon Smith. He had just lost re-election, but he was briefing the apostles on his work. And then you're going to see Elder Ralph Hardy, who is that liaison. He's the person who has an office in D.C., and he's the one that communicates between the church and these politicians. Okay, so in 2007, the Mormon Church released a video with top leaders denying that they tried to influence politicians at all. This is the front header of their video. So they're telling you, these are apostles that are telling you, so you can trust this. They're telling the truth. They would not lie.
It's a little frustrating from our perspective to have people saying, well, is he going to follow some kind of a policy line that the church has?
So he's talking about that it's frustrating for the apostles for everybody to say, well, Mitt Romney's just going to follow the instructions of the church. He's going to prioritize the interests of the church above his constituency, so we can't trust him. That's like a very common theme when you deal with a Catholic or a Mormon in political office. I mean, if you want to relate to that, you say, well, how would you feel if, a lot of people in America have a lot of mistrust and suspicion about Muslim people who fall under a religious authority of the religious caliphate or some sort of mullah? And so I think, if you're having a hard time as a Mormon trying to understand what's the problem with all this, of course, the prophets are only going to say good things. So anything the prophets would say is, of course, going to be aligned with the interests of the nation. You just have to imagine that some other religious structure that you don't trust had the same type of tie into the influence of the person. So let's keep going.
In my Senate career, I had occasion to visit with President Hinckley, President Monson, and President Faust. Towards the end of that interview, I asked them if I could ask a question about this issue. I told them that I had been characterized in my campaigning as disliking gays and lesbians. I do not dislike them or anyone. And I wanted to know where the boundaries are. I told them, if you want to know my position on issues in relationship to culture, they could find them in my bishop's handbook. And those are how I voted.
Yes, we have a
So on one end, you have the apostles saying, we don't instruct the bishops on or politicians on how they should vote. And then on the other hand, you have a politician in a discussion with the prophet doing a form of political virtue signaling, because he still exists within this religious hierarchy, and trying to, he's telling the prophet, I vote on social issues according to the principles that are laid out in the bishop's handbook. And that's a big problem. That's absolutely validating. And remember, he's saying this in a private audience. That's absolutely validating the concerns that the American public has that a religious figure is going to take instructions from the religious authority that they fall under. All right, let's keep going.
Before you do, Jonathan.
Yeah.
If you can pull up I screen shared here. If you can just pull this up, it should be noted here. If you zoom into that last line above the references, if you can, I don't know if it'll let you do that. Maybe I can do it.
Yeah,
let me see if I can.
If you do it on your screen, we'll see it.
So if you notice, let's go. Give me a second. Sorry, I'm wasting time here. On March 31st, 2012, Gordon Smith, that's the senator we're talking about, was called as an Area 70 in ecclesiastical leadership position in the LDS Church. He was rewarded for his loyalty.
Absolutely.
When you understand the situation, you go like, okay, this guy tells the top 15 and other general authorities that he is a church broke man, that he will always help the church's interest over other things. And then to realize that he is exposed, the church is exposed, the video comes out through Mormon leaks. And as a reward for that loyalty, he is a Area 70 called back in 2012.
Yep. One more rung higher up on the religious ladder towards the apostleship.
Yep.
All right.
You got it.
Thanks for looking that up. All right, so let's go back to this. All right, let's keep going.
Church of not interfering with public officials, some of whom are.
I'm going to
And
rewind
those
a little
are
bit.
how I voted.
Yes, we have a long record in the church of not interfering with public officials, some of whom are on all sides of almost all public opinions. There's been no evidence of any effort to influence that in any way.
I just can't stress what it means to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay, so you have the apostles saying there's no evidence that the church has ever influenced any politician, and now we've got this closed-door meeting. Ralph Hardy is the attorney who is the man who is holding the leash of all the Mormon senators and congressmen. So when the brethren say, well, we've got this issue, we need to do it, or we need an interview with a government leader, or we want to make sure that a vote goes a certain way, that he's the person who then communicates it to it. And we're talking about national politics now. If you talk to some former Utah politicians, they will tell you that this level of control and influence is even more concentrated in Utah government. And, certainly you guys can speak to that more than I can out here in Texas. But this is how the game is played. So let's see what he has to say, because he's saying anytime there was an issue, what is Mr. Hardy going to tell us here?
To the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to have which we've had five temple recommend carrying high priest in the United States Senate.
Okay, now, if you're not Mormon, you may not understand the significance of what he just said. He said it is of inestimable value to the church to have 5 temple recommend carrying members of the Senate. When they say temple recommend carrying, what they're saying is that every one of those people have gone through the temple ceremony. They've passed the interview, which already makes them subordinate to the religious authority, because they've had to affirm that they uphold the prophet of the church today as the representative of God. And then in the temple, they have sworn oaths to uphold the church and the interests of the church, because in the temple recommend the kingdom of God is equated to the church, and you're swearing to give everything that you have or that you will have to the church. And it's done under this notion that obedience is the first law of heaven, and that you're swearing an oath to the law of obedience. And if you think about the age of these politicians, back when they were young men going through the temple prior to their mission, prior to their endowment, that was back when the penalties were in place. So each of them also had the whole, swearing that their life would be taken rather than for them to violate these covenants. And that's Mitt Romney included. You can see, if you Google Elder Holland and the BBC, there's a video that shows a reporter asking Elder Holland about this issue around the Romney campaign, about whether or not Romney swore these oaths in the temple on penalty of death. And there's a very weaselly part where Elder Holland's like, no, there's no penalties in the temple. And then the journalist, who was very well informed, says, oh, but there used to be. And then Holland is kind of caught, and he's like, well, yeah, there used to be. And then there's audio of that, of what used to play in the temple, so you can see exactly what these men swore to. And, how would you feel if some person in a religion you didn't trust, if we're talking about Muslims, had sworn before a representative of their religious hierarchy that they would rather suffer their lives to be taken than to violate an oath to uphold their religious framework? That's a very uncomfortable thing for the public to see in a religious figure. And that's why, even though we may agree with Romney's vote, the fact that he's rooting it in his oaths to God, you have to remember that includes the oath to God taken as a government official, as well as his personal and private oaths taken in the temple. Anything to add to that, Bill?
I think that this isn't the only system that does that, Mormonism, that is. There are lots of religious systems. There have been political systems. There have been other kinds of systems where the tribal perspective is taught as like, this is God's perspective, or this is the ultimate perspective, and anything else, any dissent, any criticism, any trying to run up against it is essentially frowned upon by the entire system. You know, one of the things that makes this country great, in spite of all of its flaws, is that you're able to disagree, and there's freedom to do that. In systems like Mormonism, disagreement is seen as bad. It's seen as contentious. It's seen as something that has to do with the adversary or Satan. And it's not the only system that does it, but those aspects are deeply unhealthy when you feel peer pressure to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, absolutely. And if going against what you're told is equated with going against God, that's some powerful stuff.
Yeah, and
right.
and on top of that, you have a system that deeply rewards its members who show their loyalty as trumping common sense, as trumping their conscience.
Yeah, and as trumping any other obligation. And when you watch the original video that we're taking this from, one of the most alarming things that Senator Smith says is he tells the brethren, I know who you are, I know what you represent, and I consider my temple recommend to be a more important document than my electoral certificate. Now, if you think about it, that electoral certificate is the certificate that an elected official takes to D.C., which grants him a seat in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, because it represents the will, the endorsement of his constituency. And so what he's saying is that the temple recommend, which is his oath to this religious figure, is more important than his obligations and trust of his constituency. And that is a huge red flag. But it's said in these religious terms, and so people kind of, I think that was part of the controversy when these videos first came out. But let's keep going because I want to get through this.
Okay.
All right.
And a large number in the House of Representatives, what it means to the transaction of business, to have access, to be able to influence decisions, to reach beyond our shores. And as I said in my introduction, what Senator Smith has done, and I can say the same for our other brethren of both parties, it is of inestimable value to this church. And I hope that in the days and years ahead, that the miracle of these brethren being in Washington will be repeated, and that worthy brothers and sisters of this church in this country and in other lands will rise up and find ways to be in elective office. And
now remember, he's saying that right after this apostle here, Elder Cook, is saying there's no evidence that the church has ever tried to influence politicians. And then you have Hardy saying, it's been of inestimable value to the church to have these 5 senators and congressmen so that we can exert our influence, so we can have access. So behind the scenes, they're telling you the true story. And then you've got the PR piece from the politicians trying to put the public's mind at ease. This video was so infuriating to me because it really exposed the two-faced nature of the apostles. Like I had such high regard for the apostles when I was a believing member of the church. I would never have assumed that there was this two-faced aspect to them. All right, let's keep going. What's the next section?
The members understand that. Political candidates understand that. They don't ever come to the church and say, what should I do?
though I can't remember any Latter-day Saints that were permanent members of his staff, it was fair to say that his staff in the Senate was church broke. In fact, not many months ago, his legislative director called me on the phone and he said, Ralph, you haven't called us for 6 weeks. What are we supposed to be doing?
So that quote there is very telling, because you have, he's acting Elder Cook. He's like indignant. He's like, I can't believe we're so persecuted. Everybody thinks that we've got this control over our politicians. Even the members know that we don't try to influence things, and we don't try to. And then you've got Ralph Hardy, saying we've got to use these men and even into the future. And if you think about that, what he's saying is that any politicians that they have in positions of power in the future need to be used. And this concept of a politician and his staff being church broke, that's like a weird term. And when this video came out, I did some searching for the concept and term of church broke in the Mormon context. And you don't find it anywhere except before this video came out, there was a document written by Grant Palmer where he gives an account of meeting behind the scenes a general authority who had lost belief in the church but was in an impossible position, not being able to act on his conscience just because there were so many people depending on him, and he had lived this, what he now saw was a lie. And the general authority told him that the way that the apostles judge people who become elevated in the church hierarchy was by whether or not they were church broke. And he used that concept of church broke. And we couldn't find that term anywhere else until here, behind closed doors, we have this liaison, the person that is communicating with politicians, use the term church broke to describe a senator's office when he's praising the senator for being ready to do the will of the brethren. And so that, to me, that affirmed and validated Grant's story.
Yeah, and it should be noted, I shared the quote over in the comments there, both here in this broadcast as well as on the Facebook page. But you have a quote from him. He voted for the Iraq War back in 2002, and he says, "I know and have been a critic of the Iraq War, but I also admit to you that I voted for it because I felt the Lord's hand in it." Now, that doesn't sound so bad. Everybody's allowed to have the dictates of their own conscience tell them essentially how they would act as a politician, while also trying to represent their constituents. Smith said, "I hope it works out, but I can promise you this: you'll never send missionaries to the Arab street until the rule of law exists in Arabia, and it has taken root in Iraq. And ultimately, if that succeeds, there will be opportunity to begin building the church in the Middle East, which is a deeply troubled place." It's this idea that the church wants to grow. It wants to be available everywhere. It wants to have access to every country. And its politicians, when working with the church, are not necessarily trying to avoid conflict or war or do what's right for America, but rather open up the gateway for LDS missionaries to enter these various spaces, which seems very unethical when you consider the motives behind that kind of decision, abandoning essentially your constituents and trying to promote the gospel of your particular religion.
Yeah. I think when you have government leaders who hold the reins of military force, of military power, which includes the lives and property of innocent non-combatants in any country and nation, when you have them making decisions to enter into conflicts based on end of times religious dogma, that is a very scary and very dangerous thing. And that quote that you're reading is taken from this behind door session where the senator is being honest in a way that he would never be to the public if he knew that this was going to go out, informing the brethren that his vote was not informed by what he felt was best for the nation or the will of his constituency. It was informed by his notion of how the purposes of God, according to the framework of this religion, is supposed to play out in the end times, in that the gospel is supposed to, cover the earth.
Yeah, and just to note another thing, which is all of us are different privately than we are publicly. But the people who are the most aligned privately with who they are publicly, all of us tend to see that person as having some type of value and honesty and authenticity and vulnerability that we as a collective human race appreciate. And it feels like so often in the church, what you see behind closed doors when you get peeks is so different from the public presentation of these leaders and of the system that it's the opposite feeling like there's such a level of distrust. And Senator Gordon Smith here is a prime example of that.
Yeah. There's a movie in, I think, the 70s called Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And it was like a lot of these scary movies are. It was like a metaphor for communism at the time. And it was this notion that you could see people that looked just like you expect them to look. But if you see them in their private, real, authentic identity, if they've been taken over by the pod thing that was the invasion of the body snatchers, you would see their real place. And then they're something that is actually kind of an enemy to humanity. And there's that real sense in that thread of fear exists when you consider that people in positions of power hold to a secret or private ideology which motivates them, that they are keeping from the knowledge of the people who put them in those positions. And in the case of Mormon politicians, the fact that the temple is this secret thing where they swear oaths and have this allegiance, and then they're sitting there holding their temple reckland up before the brethren in private, saying, this is more important to me than my electoral certificate. It's like the very notion. You would be very concerned if someone of some ideology that you didn't subscribe to was using that ideology to drive their political activities. So let's keep going. Let me get this back in here.
We've got a long track record of the people who run for office, who are members of this church, representing their constituencies, representing the people, and doing the very best that they can for all of the people.
But what I regarded as my role as one who regards his temple recommend as more important than an election certificate.
I stand as a witness of his tireless advocacy.
Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple of things here. So first, that was the clip where Gordon Smith affirms to the brethren that his oaths and allegiances to the brethren was more important than his oaths to his constituency. Big red flag. But then here, this is something that if you watch Romney's Senate floor speech, the nation got a little taste of what Mormon emotion is. And anyone who's Mormon saw Romney's speech and like, this is like testimony meeting, because there are these signals that you give to project that you are feeling the spirit or that you are feeling emotional. And I think they're part of the normal human experience, but they tend to be exaggerated in Mormon performance and testimony. I think it's just part of the web of social interconnectedness, social expectations that Mormons develop when you exist in that culture. And Ralph Hardy is doing this right here. And that is when you're talking about something that is tied to a very sensitive, very dear, very special subject. In this case, it's going to be devotion to authority. He pauses, his voice breaks up a little bit. He gives himself time to collect himself, and then he keeps going. And there's a moment in Romney's speech where he does exactly this, when he talks about that he's a deeply religious man, and he takes his oaths and his commitment to God very seriously. And then you can see him, he hangs his head down a little bit, he purses his lips, he takes a moment and breathes, and then he continues. And that it's a very emotive signal that we're just like, oh, it's testimony meeting as Mormons, but the rest of the nation is getting a little bit of a taste of that type of subtext to its body language that Mormons use. Are you familiar with that yourself, Bill?
I cried in plenty of testimony meetings. And it's not that you're trying to manipulate people, but there's also an awareness somewhere in you that this is the thing we do. This works. If I start to cry during my testimony in the very way you're talking about, it does signal that I am a believing Mormon, that I am all in, and that I have a testimony of this work, and that I put it before other things in my life.
Yeah, there's a talk that Radio Free Mormon covered recently where he talks about President Eyring witnessing the miracle of how the brethren make decisions. And in that discussion, he's talking about like the most mundane, how a body of like a board of executives come to a decision by discussing things and then arriving at a thing. And in the middle of talking about that, President Eyring does this exact same thing where he's talking about how it's a miracle and he starts crying. And I'm just like, why are you crying over describing the mundane administrative duties of a thing? And it's just part of the language, part of the emotive language, how you prove it's a form of Mormon virtue signaling that you're showing that you're in touch with the spirit because you have these emotions. And I think that's what we're seeing.
And if you ever need, if any of you out there ever need to show people what this looks like, you can literally pull up any Elder Eyring talk and it will be on display.
Yeah. All right. There's a video on my YouTube channel called A Masterclass in Emotional Manipulating. If you just Google that, and you'll see a whole video where you can see it's broken down by thing. There's all sorts of subtle cues that go into it. And President Eyring is a master of it all. All right, let's keep going.
For the vital interest of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For in my experience, he always stood ready first and foremost as a high priest and as a covenant member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint, and receptive and able and willing to serve its most vital interest in Washington and, in fact, internationally.
So there we have the liaison to the senators and the House of Representatives affirming to the prophet that Senator Smith was a good company man because first and foremost, he was a high priest. Before he was a senator, he was a high priest. Now, what this is showing you, this is how the Mormon worldview is, and that is that your commitment to God is equated with your commitment to the church and the leaders of the church, and that is your highest value and your highest priority, no matter what other position that you find yourself in. And it sounds nice and pleasant as a low-level member when you go and you make these covenants, you're committing yourself to God. But when you see how the leaders label and talk about the people who are in those positions of power, they talk about them being covenant members, temple recommend holding members, and what they're saying is they're signaling that these are people over whom we have an influence because they've demonstrated their willingness to subordinate any other interest, any other priority to that of the church, and that is church broke.
Yeah, and maybe just a side note, because I think it's just deeply interesting. You juxtapose Elder Eyring's emotion in every single talk that he gives. There's also a video out there that shows that whenever there's a prayer in General Conference, he's always got his eyes open and he's just doing something else besides praying. I think it's interesting when you juxtapose those two things together. There's something strange going on, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just feels out of place.
Yeah. It makes it seem like a lot of these things are a performance, honestly. All right, so let's keep going.
That's it.
On the way to the airport, I didn't call my staff. I called Elder Hardy, and I hope you brethren know that Elder Hardy's a lawyer, but I don't know when he ever does any legal work. He works full-time for the church. And I said, Ralph, if there's any way you can go to the ambassador's home, he's expecting you, codify this as best we can. I believe we have a mission in India now.
Two.
It started from that meeting, and this is the way that you ought to use Mike Crapo, the way you ought to use Harry Reid, the way you ought to use Orrin Hatch and Bob Bennett. These are great men. These are great colleagues, and they're dedicated Latter-day Saints.
Now, he's listing off all of the Mormon senators and congressmen. And this happened before Romney was a senator. If this video took place while Romney was a senator, he would have listed Romney's name in among all of these other names. And when he's talking to the brethren and he's saying, this is how you ought to use, and then he lists these other people, do you think that they're going to say, we should use all these people, but if anyone becomes a president or something, we shouldn't use them? And even if you don't get to the president's office, the fact that you have a religious hierarchy, men who claim to be the mouthpiece for God, exerting influence and control over politicians who represent a completely different state. Senator Smith is from Oregon, and Oregon has a small, minuscule minority of Mormons, and yet this group has a very disproportionate influence over the type of access and the type of decisions that are going into their representative. It's a huge problem. Yeah,
and you recognize this is a church state, Utah. I live here in southern Utah. The church controls essentially it has a lot of controlling power. About half of the population are members of the church, and that is in decline. But it is a church state in that they have so much influence. And I'm interested in watching this unfold. I hope I live another 30 or 40 years to watch this, because little by little, it's losing its influence in Utah. And there will come a day when that amount of influence is so low that they no longer have the ability to sway significant programs and agendas and addendums and procedures and policies. And when that day happens, it's going to be interesting to see what this church does when it essentially loses all of its political power.
Well, if money can translate into political power, it may be in a good position for a long time, even if it can't.
It's got a lot of money.
Yeah, even if it can't hold, religious authority over the head of politicians, it can certainly hold money. What you're alluding to, I caught a little bit of a whiff of in my kind of background search in preparing things on the issue of child sex abuse. And that is that the Catholic Church is a few decades ahead of the Mormon Church in having to deal with the issue and its aftermath in the culture. And, before all of the cover-ups of child sex abuse by the Catholic Church were out, the Catholic Church had a huge influence over politics in Ireland. And there was a documentary that the BBC put out where they were talking to mothers in particular, because the mothers were the stalwarts of the church, who were the ones that forced the men, forced the children to get in and to be active in the church. And when they learned that the leaders of the church had betrayed their trust by covering up these child sex abuse, they were forcing the kids to go, and then the kids were being abused, then the mothers were just like, that's it, I'm done. And the influence of the church over the culture, over the politics has vanished in just a tremendous rapid pace because of the lost trust on these issues. And so I think that issue of child abuse cover-up may be part of what would accelerate what you're talking about, Bill, in Utah, just because it is so dear and so close to every individual, to every family.
Yeah, one of the comments here on the broadcast is, don't forget about Prop 8. The church denied having any involvement in that directly, and then we finally, from I think Mormon Leaks again, get a flow chart that shows that Elder Ballard and other general authorities are at the top of a flow chart that designates how that issue was handled in California. It just feels as though the church is constantly being dishonest about its influence. And just last year here in Utah, the church tried to put in a referendum to make it a two-party state in terms of audio and video recordings. Yeah. And it did not want to be seen as being involved in that. And there was quite an uproar. And there were a lot of post-Mormons, ex-Mormons, non-believers who got involved and essentially shot that down, and they had to pull it back. But the church wanted this to be a two-party state, meaning that everybody in a conversation had to agree to allow it to be recorded, for it to be recorded. And you can see the protection that would give a church state, that religious entity and its leaders. On
that issue, I remember that, and one of the revealing aspects of it was that the church gets proxies to execute its will. And it was a trade organization, I think, that took
a different name.
Yeah, that took those marching orders, and then they proposed it as though it was their own interest for it. But when it was kind of part of this discussion, it was revealed that the heads of that organization were asked to do it by the church. And so they were doing exactly what Gordon Smith is talking about here, where they're ready to act on the marching orders of the religious people and do it in a way that is a form of political subterfuge. It's just really disgusting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Let's see here. Let's get this back to where we were.
And it was my privilege to respond, not often enough. When he would call, he didn't call enough. But when he did, we saw miracles.
All right. So that's the conclusion of that video. This screen here is alluding to the fact that I did kind of a line-by-line breakdown of that leaked video, which you can find if you Google that. It's called Politicians to Which Oath Are They Bound on the YouTube channel. And it just really shows all of the problematic parts of that leaked video. I mean, he goes so far as to tell them information which he's like, is this classified? I think it may be classified, but it's almost like a sign of how devoted he is to the first presidency that he's sharing with them classified information about Iran's, nuclear reserves. It's just
didn't call enough. I mean, he had hoped that Hardy would call him more often and tell him what the church wanted him to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all of this is just to say that, if we would like to see Trump be held accountable for some of the things that we see that he's done that is deplorable, and we see Mitt Romney standing up, voting against his party in that vein, we can see it as a good thing. And it's it certainly is against Mitt's political interests. He's isolated himself there, and you could say that speaks to his character. And we consider being true to one's principles and one's promises and oaths to be a good moral thing to do. The problem is that moral can be subverted when you subordinate it to a system of control based on manipulation and deception. These men claim to speak for God, and they claim that any directive that they would give is in the best interest of the world, which is in God's kingdom that they have a stewardship over. But if that claim is false, then what they are doing is they're basically using false dogma, false ideas to empower them to control politicians at the highest seat of power. And that is what the American public was afraid of when Romney ran for president. And what we are seeing is that Romney does consider himself deeply religious. He considers his oaths and his covenants to be binding upon his conscience. And those oaths and covenants tied in with God do not remain solely in the political realm. They also remain deeply in the religious realm when you look at the nature of the temple covenants that he would have sworn an oath to.
Yeah, amen.
All right. So that's the big, I think, news thing. If somebody would like to call and maybe add a couple of cents to this conversation, the lines are open. The line, one line, 210-422-2222. Feel free to call and share your perspective on all of this. I think that's the end of the stuff that I have for today. Let me pull up my Google Docs and see. There was one thing that somebody has been asking to make an appearance. I don't know if we can do this. Let's see here. Okay. Have you ever heard of evil apostate, Bill?
Evil apostate. I'm familiar with him. I've seen him. In fact, I think I saw him and Sandra Tanner meet at the Lighthouse Ministry. I thought that was kind of a cool little visit. Quite a character he is.
Yeah, so evil apostate is this figure that shows up every once in a while under the theme that, when you look at former Jehovah's Witnesses and you look at the things that the Jehovah's Witness consider to be evil, according to their proprietary moral code, the things that they think are evil and signs of apostasy is stuff that you and I would consider to be like totally mundane. So reading a comic book, evil. Having a Christmas tree, evil. All these different things. And so evil apostate realized that he could do things that would identify him as evil. And I'm gonna see if I can get him in here. You have to give me a second, though. You're going to carry the weight of this show for just a little bit, Bill. And then if Evil Apostate shows up, then he'll be added. So it's all your show now.
So, listeners, Jonathan has just thrown me a bone, and here we are kind of having a conversation. I thought it was interesting earlier, and again, I would just say that if anybody is listening and you live in Southern Utah, or if you're just driving through, I get lots of people, probably 2 or 3 times a week, somebody swings by that knows who I am and kind of watches folks like me and Jonathan in this arena talk about Mormonism, and people stop by and we have a conversation. If you ever do want to stop by the museum case, all those things are in it. We're always adding things to it. We just put the Hofmann Seer stone in there yesterday. But the items are cool. Mormonism is so tied to historical events. It is so tied to historical experiences. And every truth claim that Mormonism has is tied to the historicity of a historical event occurring. And those events have all taken place in the last 200 years. It's not one of the older religions. It's one of the newer ones. And so, and to Mormonism's credit, it asked its members to keep journals, and its leaders kept journals, and all these writings are available. And so, in 200 years, Mormonism to me has such an interesting history. So many cool things that happened. Fascinating events, some of them insanely crazy. Jonathan was just pointing to the Jehovah's Witnesses and the things they think are evil. And, our church has got this too. You read Mormon Doctrine from Bruce R. McConkie, and you can see that there are lots of things in the texts of that book that also are seen as not good. And then Mormonism has its word of wisdom, and it has tithing, other things. So kind of a cool thing too. Anyway, just Mormon history is fascinating. I saw just a little blip there. I don't know, Jonathan, if your friend is ready to show up. Uh-oh, I see something.
Hello, Internet. Can you hear me? It is I, Evil Apostate. I am here in a morning breakfast show with coffee and the Bill Reel. Hello.
How you doing, Evil Apostate?
I'm doing good. How are you, the Bill?
I'm doing great, my friend.
Now, I see that you're hosting show, and it is kind of boring. Like, frankly, I don't know who wants to listen to your crap, but it's not me.
Well,
now,
Jonathan threw me under a bus and just threw me out here, and so here I am trying to keep everybody entertained until you
did good. You filled the time, but people don't want to listen to you. They are here for the Evil Apostate. Now, if you would like to talk to the Evil Apostate, you call the number. Maybe we talk 422-210. Now, Bill, the other day, I was doing the evil thing. You know the evil thing I do, Bill?
Yeah, I hear you do lots of evil things.
It's called chamomile tea. It is Satan's elixir. Oh, I was drinking it. It made me feel calm. It was like having Satan's arms around my porn shoulders. Did you ever experience the chamomile?
I've never experienced the chamomile. I'm a big fan of Red Roca coffee myself.
He's always plugging things. Did they give you like $25 to say the name of the coffee?
I get a small kickback for every order where somebody puts in the code AWAKE.
You can't plug your show on my show, Bill. Who do you think you are? You're plugging your show on my show. Okay, I need somebody to call in and put Bill in his place.
Please.
Please. All right. You're right. I did meet the Sandra Tanner, and she was good, friendly old lady. I gave her a kiss. It was like kissing Satan. I know, because the brethren told me that she is doing the work of Satan. You know what she did? Back in the day, she published the church handbook. Oh, so evil.
So bad.
She allowed the membership of the church to know exactly what standard to which they would be held. It was the evil thing. The church would never do this. Right?
Her and her husband printed Shadow or Reality, where they spoke about the actual historical conundrums and occurrences in Mormonism, also very evil.
Yes, of course, the church now is doing just that. They're publishing the manual themselves. Does this mean that the church is evil? No. You know how? Because whatever the church does is good because the church does it. They took a little hint from Nixon, right? Yes. Whatever the president does is legal because the president is the one that did it. You just, you take that and you say whatever the church does is good and moral because it is the church that does it. And that's how you know. Yes.
Sure. I'm curious, maybe you're carrying around an iron banded jasper rock in your belly. You look kind of like a dinosaur.
No, the things I have in my belly are the evil things, like hot drinks.
No magic rocks.
No, but I do drink the hot drinks. You know what else I do?
What would that be?
I engage in the laughter that is above a threshold of decibels.
Yeah. That's a big
Yes.
evil when you laugh too hard because something
Yes.
was just too funny.
I used to take oath in big ornate building that looked like Las Vegas hotel waiting room. I oath not to speak ill of the Lord's anointed, or
No matter what they do. No
That's
matter
right.
what wrong they do, no matter what they say that doesn't add up, no matter how much they change their mind, your job is not to criticize them.
Exactly. Elder Oaks has taught you well. Okay, so tied to my oath not to speak ill of the Lord's anointed was also not to engage in the loud laughter.
So do you do all things evil?
You have to understand, my conception of evil is different, perhaps, than yours.
Well, do you ever touch your little factory?
What? What are you talking about?
Boyd K.
Dragons
Packer.
do not have factories.
You know, Boyd K. Packer. And if you touch the little factory, it will produce some material.
That was really good. I felt like you were the Boyd K. Packer right there.
He came back to life.
Oh, you are speaking ill of the Lord's anointed. That is evil.
I've been excommunicated, so I'm as evil probably as you are.
Okay, well, let's test it. All right, we're going to try laughter.
Let's do it. Are we gonna do like a handshake? Is that what we're gonna do? Okay.
Soft laughter. Okay, that's good, but that's not evil because it is not loud.
No,
All right. Medium laughter. Yes, still not evil. You're not evil enough, apostate.
Not yet.
Okay, here we go. Oh, it's so evil. That was loud laughter.
I felt the light go out of my eyes. Can you see my eyes? They're gone. I've lost his countenance.
You know, oddly enough, that is how I imagine those Thursday evening temple meetings go. You know, the brethren sitting around, they're like, hey, everybody saw 124 billion in Ensign Peak. It's too bad.
It wasn't 100 billion. It was 124 billion.
Yes, it's too bad they don't know about the hundreds of other billions in the other companies and countries. And then
rodeos, shopping malls, high-rise towers, land, cattle ranches, you name it, evil apostate, the church owns a piece of it.
That's right. And then they all go, oh, your evil apostate laugh is very good.
I've lost the Holy Ghost.
Yes, you have a terrible audience. Not a single person has decided.
Maybe I'm still wearing the special,
That is T-shirt. That is not low enough.
It's a Hanes. You know what I mean, evil apostate? I just want to look the part.
That's terrestrial smile, not celestial.
No. Hanes is the terrestrial smile.
That's right. It's more like
There's
terrestrial
more loud
grimace.
Oh, you're tricking me. You're getting me to laugh loud again and again, evil apostate. You make me lose the Holy Ghost.
All right. I think I got to go. I have to go and find this factory that you're talking about.
Don't touch your little factory.
You're a terrible person.
Material. And when that material, it will go by the nighttime. Oh, boy. Well, there was evil apostate. Hopefully Jonathan gets back from using the restroom. I think that's where he went off to. But that was a ton of fun. Maybe one of these times on Mormon Discussion, and there I go plugging again, we'll have the evil apostate on and Jonathan on and have a conversation with evil apostate.
I don't show up on any shows with him. He's a terrible person. He makes a terrible mess.
You know, you mentioned that. I've never heard you laugh loudly, Jonathan. So I can see how you and him probably aren't getting along that well.
I don't curse and I don't laugh loudly. And I have no idea what factory he was talking about. He told me he was going to be in his bunk. There was something about a bunk. I don't know.
Bunk. Oh, boy. I don't know if you have...
We're getting a call. Hold up.
Awesome. Let's take it.
All right. Hold on just a second.
I hope they weren't, because of the delay, I hope they weren't trying to catch evil apostate.
They might have been.
Actually, a call-in show.
Hold on. I hope they weren't. They weren't trying to catch evil apostate.
All right, you're on Talk on Things and Stuff.
Is this a call-in show?
It is a call-in show, and you're on with us live, although there's a delay, so if you want to mute your computer, you can hear us. Or turn it down if you want to hear Bill.
Yeah, I noticed that it looked like it was a call-in show, but nobody was calling in. So what's the deal?
People don't like to talk on live. You get the nerves. I don't know. It's not that popular, you know. This is like our second week.
Yeah, I was just calling because I happened to turn on the computer and it came up that you guys are doing this coffee talk thing is it once a week you do it?
Yeah, we're trying to do it every Friday morning, just kind of to recap the events in the world of Mormonism from the last week and to get people's take on things. So that's the deal. Do you have anything on your mind?
No, not really. You know, my mind's completely gone blank since I left the church 4 or 5 years ago. I've had to totally just decide that we gotta just go along with the flow because the world is not the way I thought the world was. No, it is different.
All that certainty that you had once upon a time is gone.
Yeah, it's almost like the Truman Show. That when you walk out from the church, you realize that your reality was completely different. And then I started observing things around me in the real world, and realized that the whole world is kind of like this. I've been watching U.S. politics pretty closely for the past year or so, and realized that it is not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
So, as a Mormon, an ex-Mormon, it's almost as if there's kind of a difference in reality. Am I making any sense there?
Oh, I think I can relate to that very much. How about you, Bill? I know you have to go soon, Bill, if you want to respond to that, and then I'll let you take off.
Yeah, there was a pride in the certainty. There was a appreciation of the certainty. You want to let him know I'm talking?
Yeah, Bill's going to respond to what you're saying. You'll have to see it on the stream because we haven't fixed the audio so that you can hear him yet. That'll be something for the future.
The certainty that's out there in Mormonism, like it's really like what we value. It's how we signal each other, because I'm sure and you're sure and he's sure and they're sure. Everybody's certain, and we all get up once a month and we tell each other how certain we are. And so this certainty in Mormonism, and it's a part of other systems too, Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientology, all those kinds of things. But at some point when I woke up and I stepped back from Mormonism, I go like, oh, this doesn't add up. I realized like the certainty gone. I know what it's not, but I no longer know what it is. And now I really enjoy just the questions. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. The questions become much more valuable. Conversations where there is a lack of certainty among people talking, and people get to share different viewpoints and perspectives without somebody in the back of their head going, I know he's wrong. I know he's wrong. I'm right. It just makes the world a much more beautiful place.
Yeah, and the thing that I like about it as well is that if somebody does make a position or make an argument or draw a perspective on something, they really only have the strength of their argument, their power of persuasion, how compelling they can make it. That's the only thing that can validate what they say. Whereas before that, it's like, well, this religious leader said it, and so it's the will of God, there you go.
Circular reasoning and conclusion.
Yeah, you end up having to accept things not based on the strength of their argument or moral persuasion, but just on religious edict and authority.
Egyptologist Kerry Molstein knows the Book of Abraham is true, so he takes all of the data points and works them in to fit that working conclusion.
Yeah, and you see that it's a form of epistemological arrogance and deficiency that just, if you see it in any other context, you just are like, that's ridiculous. You would never accept that in any other framework. But then when it's talking about your religion, the things that you hold dear, what you're talking about in terms of a priori approach to things, where you already accept as a definitive premise a certain reality. And so rather than look at the evidence and draw a conclusion, you look at the evidence, cram it into that reality and fit it, ignore anything that doesn't fit there. And, thus you end up with people who don't understand why perhaps we should be opposed to gay marriage, but because the church has said, donate money, go door to door, do all these things for Proposition 8, then they're going to do it because the church has said that that's the right thing to do. And
I know that aliens live in my backyard. I know they do. And every time I hear a noise or a rustle of leaves or a noise of something going down my road, I automatically fit that into my proposition that there are aliens living in my backyard.
Which is one thing when you're deciding it for yourself, but then if somebody else who claims to speak absolute truth tells you, Bill, there are aliens in your backyard, and so then you accept that as a reality, but then they turn it against you and say, because there are aliens in the backyard, they're going to get you unless you build a shelter, unless you pay me so that my services will keep the aliens off of you, unless you go to the meetings for my group. So, and it's just, there's one thing to have a false belief, and then there's something else to use that false belief on others to compel them to do things that only make sense in the context of the false belief if it was real. And as soon as you discover that the belief itself is false, it takes away that control power.
How many Mormons have had a year's supply of food that have never used it, that have lived in the last 150 years of food storage, when they would have been better served having taken that money and put it into a savings account that earned, even if it earned no interest, they would have been further ahead. And I get it. Some people use food storage when they get laid off, or, there are instances of it being useful, but the unuseful examples so far outnumber the useful examples that it becomes a absurd proposition to have done it in the first place.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've had our calls. We didn't have quite as much to cover this week, and we don't have to go 3 hours every week. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I appreciate you hosting with me again, Bill, and we will see what happens this coming week. And you guys make sure to come back next Friday morning. If we get a chance to do it, we will be here. And until then, this is Coffee Talk on Things and Stuff.